Hello, Jorbs here coming at you with another Spireside chat. Today I want to talk to you about Deus Ex Machina, the God from the Machine. So, the God from the Machine was a thing in ancient theater where I guess they couldn't work out how to have sensible conclusions to stories, and so they lowered an actor from a crane sort of thing and pretended they were a god, and then the god was like, it's all good now. I don't know why this card is called that, but I guess miracles are coming out of it, so I guess that sort of makes sense. Sure, I get it. This is a bit of a weird card. This is unplayable. When you draw it, you add 2 miracles to your hand and you exhaust it. If you have a Deus Ex Machina Plus, you get 3 miracles instead. Miracle is a card that you get from the starter relic for Watcher, so usually your run will start with one of them in every one of your opening hands. Costs 0, retains, and it gives you an energy when you play it and exhausts. So, this is sort of like a really good version of something like Turbo or Outmaneuver, except that it exhausts, so you only get to play it once. When you draw it, you immediately get 2 or 3 energy, and you can even choose to use that 2 or 3 energy at different times. There are some things to note that happen because this card generates miracles instead of just being a card that you play. So one of them is that Watcher has a retain mechanic and can often have quite a lot of retained cards. Like you could have a Worship retained in your hand, you could have a Blasphemy retained in your hand, you could have like a Perseverance or 2 retained in your hand, Meditate may cause you to be retaining cards from last turn, etc, etc, etc. Deus Ex, when you draw it, it's like drawing 2 cards. And so if you already had 5 cards retained in your hand, all of a sudden this is blocking your draws. And that is one downside of this card. Another thing that happens when you play miracles is like time meter clock ticks up, or the beat of death hits you for 2 damage, or the chosen debuff from Act 2, that awful bird thing enemy that puts dazes in your deck. Those dazes will all go off for each one of the miracles that you play. So there can be some reasons that you aren't that happy that this card is giving you miracle cards instead of like, I guess the dream perhaps would be for it to be like you get ice cream effect, so your energy stays forever until you spend it, and it gives you 2 energy immediately, so you don't have to play any miracles or draw any miracles. Maybe that could be better against those downsides. There's no card really in the game that's quite like that, so everything has some sort of downside generally. Even that would have some sort of downside because, well, whatever. There are also some upsides, though, to getting these miracles. One is if you have Dead Branch and want to proc it a lot, this card procs it a lot. The Deus Ex Machina exhausts itself, so when you draw it, you will get a card from Dead Branch, and then each of the miracles will get a card from Dead Branch, so that's sort of cool. Miracles can be upgraded with Master Reality, which can be okay to have in a deck sometimes. I don't think it's one of the better Watcher scaling powers, but it can be good. It's not terrible every time. Sometimes you want to take it for sure. Miracles can also help you stack slow against the giant head. They can help you proc Letter Opener if you're trying to play lots of skills in a turn. So there are many ways in which the act of having a card in your hand gives you options which let you do things in this game. And you can think about the miracle not just as giving you 1 energy, but also as giving you 1 card which you can play at a time of your choosing to do the thing that you want to do with it, whatever that is, whether it's to proc Letter Opener. Perhaps you want to have played a skill before you play Sanctity, because if your last card played this combat was a skill, you draw 2 cards when you play Sanctity. So maybe you're going to hold on to the miracle until you're about to play Sanctity, and then you play the miracle, play Sanctity, and draw your 2 cards. There are there are so many ways in which those two miracles can be used for different things. And if your deck has more reasons to like having those miracles and fewer reasons to dislike them, so for example, you already think that you do very well against Time Eater, so you don't really care that you're having to play two miracles, or you're pretty good against the Chosen fight in Act 2. Those would be reasons maybe to like miracles more. Or you have a letter opener, boom, another reason to like a miracle more. That's going to change the evaluation of the card for you. So it's a card that's very hard to evaluate in a vacuum. I can't just tell you this card's good or bad, because how good it is to have a miracle in your hand that you get to play at some point really depends on what it does when you do that, beyond just giving you the one energy. I would say that the most common problem for me with Deus Ex Machina, and why I tend not to take it a huge amount of the time, is that it feels like Watcher has better ways to make a lot of energy than this card. And it also feels to me a decent amount of the time like Watcher struggles just a little bit to draw a lot of cards. It feels like a character where the card pool is more in favor of having lots of energy and not having enough card draw. And a couple of the big things for energy are Deva Form. If you can get Deva Form into play with your deck, this card can just win you the run. This is very, very, very strong scaling. It's very slow scaling, but Watcher has so many cards that like draw one card when you play them, that if you have like a turn with 9 or 10 energy, you can just chain them together and then you can make them do more and more. So for example, take your Cut Through Fate. This is just a common. So if you just play this by itself, you scry 2, you draw 1 card, you deal 7 damage. It's actually pretty good. How to evaluate scry is difficult, but one thing to observe is that if all you care about is drawing one particular card in your deck, this is like drawing 3 cards. Actually, maybe better than drawing 3 cards, because you can discard the 2 cards you didn't want. And so you can look at the next 2 cards, and neither of them are the card you want. You discard them, you draw the next one. And that's perhaps even better than drawing 3 cards in that scenario. So this can be pretty cool. And one thing that means is that if you have like 4 Cut Through Fates because they're common, and you just want to play lots of Cut Through Fates, well, they're all effectively drawing you a ton of cards in order to find your next Cut Through Fate. And you can chain together this huge turn with Deva Form. And then you get into, well, what happens if I have Talk to the hand on the enemy I'm attacking with my Cut Through Fates? All of a sudden I'm blocking a lot. What if I have a Weave as well? Well, I'm now going to be blocking even more. What if I have a Kunai or a Shuriken or an Ornamental Fan? There are ways to make it so these Cut Through Fates do more for you. And there are other cards that you can play that draw cards as well. That's just one example of one card that's pretty good for that. So Deva Form is an example of a card where it just feels to me like I can take Deva Form and put it in play, and not only will I not need energy that Deus Ex could make me for like hallway fights or whatever, but I also won't need energy for boss fights because Deva Form's got that covered. It's just got everything covered for me. Another really strong one is Establishment. Whenever a card is retained, reduce its cost by 1 this combat. So you can use Establishment with their retain mechanic and pick up things like Protect and the like. I actually think Establishment is notably worse than Deva Form in terms of its ability to like bring home runs. This has been my experience recently. I'm not sure why that is exactly. It certainly costs 2 less energy, so maybe it doesn't need to do quite as much, but I've been liking Deva Form a lot, perhaps because I've been enjoying the Scry synergies a little bit more than the Retain synergies lately. Perhaps because there's just sort of more synergies with Scry than with Retain. It's also, I guess, worth pointing out that Deva Form lets you play the retained cards as well, because it gives you a ton of energy, right? So it doesn't really matter if the retained cards still cost 1 or 2 energy if you have 9. So these cards give you a tremendous amount of energy, and my experience with Deus Ex is that quite often I just don't really need what it's doing, and it just gets in the way of the stuff that I do need to draw. And in Slay the Spire, your two main constraints for doing the stuff you want to do in a fight, once you get past like which cards in your deck, they are energy and card draw. And if you're tending to notice that you have too much card draw to play the good cards that you're drawing, then you want to probably invest in getting some extra energy. At which point Deus Ex would be great. If I like draw 7 cards a turn and 3 of them are really good and I want to play all 3 of them, but I only have energy to play 2 of them, then picking up a card that gives you extra energy makes a ton of sense. But on the other hand, if you're not drawing enough cards to spend the energy you have very well, it's like the complete flip side. And that happens to me sometimes with Watcher. Sometimes I'll have 4 energy, I'll draw 5 cards a turn, and it will just sort of be difficult to spend all 4 of that energy well. Sometimes I'll have to like do some clever things with scrying to try to find a card that's worth playing. Sometimes I sort of won't get to play many cards that are worth playing. This is something that I notice in particular on turn 1 and 2 with Watcher before she's drawn all of her retain cards. Once you have your retain cards in hand, you can more commonly find good things to do with energy, but turn 1 and 2 are very important in this game, and you play them in almost every fight, so it's a good idea to keep an eye out for which cards are good on those turns and which ones aren't so great. And that would be my main caution with going for Deus Ex. Understand why it might be good versus bad, and just keep an eye on it, because there are going to be runs where you are drawing plenty of cards and having a bit more energy to play them is going to be great, but there are also going to be runs where having that extra energy is actually going to be a detriment because you don't have enough card draw to get to the cards which are good in your deck and worth playing anyway. And that's the big trade-off that you're often making when you're looking at a card like this. All right, hope you enjoyed the chat, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.